Hey, what's up? It's Jared with Ditch Auto, and today we are doing a review on the Sony 50mm 1.8 FE lens. Now, this lens came out several months ago, and when I got it, I got it because it's a couple $100 and it's a 50mm lens with a 1.8 aperture. Why the heck not? I didn't have any other 50mm, well, I do have one other 50mm lens that's a fully manual, more kind of fun lens than it is a lens that I use seriously. But this was the only 50mm lens that I had at the time for my Sony kit. Now, when I used to shoot Canon, my first prime lens that I ever bought was the Canon Nifty 50, the 50mm 1.8 for Canon that all Canon shooters pretty much have had at one point or another. It's a great lens, it's a great starter lens. And then from there you either upgrade to a faster, more expensive lens, or maybe you just stick it out with that lens. But that was my path. I had a couple $100, I bought that Nifty 50 for Canon, and then it was probably a year later I finally had the money to get the better 50mm lens, the really fast 1.2 Canon, just fantastic lens, and it just changed my life. And the same is to be said here with this lens. This is more of an entry-level lens. It's a 1.8. Sony's understanding that 50mm is one of the first buys that a lot of people would make on Canon, and they're trying to fill the gaps here with their platform. Sony also has recently released a 50mm 1.4, which is a fantastic lens. I have a side-by-side comparison between this lens and that 50mm lens, so make sure to check out some of the other videos that we have here on this channel. So with this lens, I bought it just kind of thinking, oh, it's gonna be a cheap experience, it's not gonna be that good of a lens, but after spending a little bit of time with it, I've actually came to really like this lens. Sure, it has some shortcomings, and yes, it's most definitely a couple $100 lens, and it performs like a couple $100, but it's a fantastic lens, and I wanna tell you all of the reasons why. First reason, 1.8 aperture. This lens lets you get really wide and let a lot of light into your camera. Now, us Sony shooters don't have to worry about low light as much as the others out there, but with f1.8, you're allowed to get a lot wider, let a lot more light in, and get a really cool depth of field fall off, which is one of the great reasons to buy a 50mm lens in the first place. So that fall off is fantastic. The short depth of field definitely looks great and performs really well. It produces some great images. Now with this lens, some of the things that do happen when you're shooting wide at 1.8 is there's a little bit of softness around the outer edges of the image. It's not sharp all the way across, and that's to be said for most lenses. When you are a wide open aperture on most lenses, they're not as sharp as they would be at, say, f6 or something like that. That's definitely the case with this lens, and you see that a bit more with this lens than you would with maybe the other 50mm or some other lenses that are a bit more expensive. This lens, definitely the build quality is decent, but it doesn't feel as good as some of the more expensive lenses, but it feels great as a small lens. I mean, the build quality is nice, it feels good in the hand, and on a camera like this, it's just a perfect match. Even though this is a full frame lens and this is not a full frame camera, the lens performs fantastically on the A6300. And what's great about this is that when and if you move up from something like the A6300 to a full frame sensor, this lens is already going to be set for that camera because it is a full frame lens that you can use on the crop or the full frame line of Sony mirrorless cameras. So other things to be said about this lens besides its build quality and the fact that it is an f1.8 is that it does really good in video. I was pleasantly surprised. The autofocus on this lens is a little noisy, so if you are trying to use your internal camera microphone, you may hear a little bit of the noise during autofocus. But if you use an external microphone like a Rode video mic that mounts on here, there's enough absorption in that whole process that you're not going to hear the autofocus working. And then of course you can always go into manual focus mode and use the manual focus ring and not have to use autofocus at all. And in that case, there's no noise whatsoever. let's talk about that focus ring. The focus ring, this is all electronic. It is not mechanical, which means that when you rotate this, you're actually turning a switch, and then there's a servo motor that is adjusting the focus on the fly. They call it fly-by-wire. Now, when you do that with this particular lens, there is a teensy little bit of lag. And when you're shooting video, that lag can kind of be annoying because you're trying to rack focus and maybe start focus up close and move focus either to something or past something. And with that little bit of lag, and it's just a little bit, but it's noticeable, if there was something moving or whatever and you were trying to time it just right, it does make it a little challenging for you to get from that, across that focus range. Now, it's not that big of a deal. Much more expensive Sony lenses have worse lag, and I have some of those lenses, but this lens does a pretty good job. There's just a teensy bit of lag. When you are shooting photos and you're using manual focus, that little tiny bit of lag just really doesn't even matter. It's more of an issue when you're shooting with video. Now, this lens does come with a lens hood. It is a relatively small lens. It takes a 49 millimeter ring, so if you're wanting to put a filter or anything on it, 49 millimeter, it's a fairly standard size, so that means there's lots of stuff available, like ND filters and stuff like that. One of the great things about lenses like this that just have a huge aperture like 1.8 is that you could put an ND filter on the front of this and then go outside on a bright day and shoot and be able to shoot wide still, like 1.8 out on a bright day, and get that brilliant blue sky and also get the shallow depth of field still. There's lots of things that you can do with a lens like this. So one of the things people kept asking me when I took a couple photos and shared that I had this on Instagram is, oh, it's a cheap lens, why'd Sony make it? And then some people were saying, is it worth it? And to me, it is totally worth purchasing. Yes, it's only a couple $100s, and I probably would never use it when I'm shooting for a client. But when I'm going out with my family or I'm taking a small camera package like this, just to have a nice little camera to go and shoot with, this is perfect. This is a fantastic package right here. Obviously, this lens doesn't act as a 50 millimeter when it's attached to a crop sensor lens. It's probably more like a 70 to 75 millimeter, but it's a fantastic package right here. I have 1.8 aperture. I can go really wide, which helps get plenty of light on this sensor in lower light situations. It's a great lens for shooting video. The photos are really good, especially if I could stop back to like around f6, I get nice sharp photos. So it's just an all-around great lens, and it's definitely worth a couple $100s. Now, if you're thinking, do I buy this lens versus Sony's other 50 millimeter lens? If you're contemplating it and price really isn't your issue, I would definitely go with a better lens. When you spend more money on lenses, you're typically almost always going to get better lenses and better quality photos out of it. But as a starter lens, as an entry-level prime lens, you cannot go wrong with this lens. Now, there's a link in the description below to where you can purchase this, and you can find out more information about this over at Amazon, and I encourage you to look at that because there are some actually good reviews that people have written on Amazon that further back up some of my statements that I made in this video. So whether you're shooting with an A6300, which is a relatively recent camera, a slightly older like an A5100 or an A6000, or maybe you have a full frame alpha camera like an A7R or something like that, this lens is going to be great. If you're looking to spend a couple $100s and you want the most bang for your buck out of a lens, like this is the lens you must get. I can't even think of another lens that Sony has right now that would be a better lens for you, especially if you're fine with having a prime lens, which means no zoom. So this lens is great. I can't sing its praises enough. Obviously, it has its shortfalls, and if you're trying to compare it to a lens like I did in my other video that's well over $1,000 more than it, you're gonna see differences. But if you're looking for a lens that is a relatively decent price and you wanna add something that's just a little bit different, like this is the next logical step for you. I really recommend this 50 millimeter lens and can't say enough good things about it, with the price being the caveat, obviously, because there are better things that could be said about it if this was an expensive lens. But it's not. It's an entry-level lens, and it's a great lens at that. And like I said at the beginning of the video, it reminds me of Canon's Nifty 50, and I think that's exactly why Sony built it. Sony built it for those people out there who want a good next step lens, a good lens to add to their kit to go along with the zoom that you probably have or something like that. If I had just bought this A6300 with the kit lens that comes on it, like the next lens I would buy would be this 50mm, because it would just open up the doors for you and your photography, and I guarantee you're gonna like it. I can't say enough good things about it. Obviously, it has its shortcomings, but it's a great lens. So let me know what you think. Like, have you owned one of those kind of nifty 50mm lenses as a Canon or a Nikon shooter? Do you own this lens, and do you agree with what I have to say about it? Or are you a pro shooter and you're looking at this lens and thinking it's a piece of garbage? I would like to know what you have to think and just kind of get your take on it as well. I think it's a great lens, and I'm going to stay with that because I know what its intended uses are for and who it was built for. Those of you out there who want a great lens at a great price, and that's exactly what this is. So thanks for checking out this video. Remember that the link to this lens is in the description below. When you click on that lens and you buy that lens, it helps support our channel and keep us afloat. And we will have a lot more videos coming soon as we have a renewed vigor for talking about cameras and all of that stuff. So thanks again for checking out this video. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next time here on Ditch Auto.